Davis Fang, thank you for joining us.
Lewis Oakley.
Here we go. Right. Lots of people are worried AI is either going to replace us at work or be the end of humanity altogether. How worried should we be?
Personally, I don't really believe in the fear-mongering. I'm sure that we've all heard of, Geoffrey Hinton, he's called the godfather of AI. He recently came out with something saying that the doomsday for humanity is between 10 to 20% within 30 years if artificial intelligence were to continue the way that it's going. However, I feel like that we all need to create a doomsday of some kind in our society just to keep things interesting. And at the end of the day, none of it really comes true, does it? So, personally, I think we should embrace AI rather than be fearful of it.
I really agree, and I'm someone that actually thinks social media was really detriment to our society, and we should have had more checks and balances before we rolled that out. At the speed at which we did. But with AI, I don't know, maybe it's because I'm a Star Trek fan. I just think, better computers, great. Like, I can now talk to the computer. I don't even have to bother typing, and it can find tailored information for me. And when I'm stuck trying to write something, it can just help me in those moments. So I think it's great, but obviously, yeah, cautious optimism.
Yeah, you might have to help me as well a little bit because I've never seen Star Trek before. I'm sure I've offended many people, but I have seen the photos of, people using a pin on their chest or something. That looks quite cool.
Yeah, I'm really all for when they bring out those pins because I don't really like screens that much. Like, I just want like a smart pin that's like, right, call Davis and tell him like blah blah blah,
There's,
whatever it
a-
is.
there's actually a product that's specifically made for you that I'm sure we'll get to later.
We'll get to it. So, I mean, sticking with AI, how do you use AI though? I mean, you are, a technology presenter. You know this stuff inside and out. So, for anyone watching thinking of dipping in their toes to this AI world, like, how do you, the expert, actually use AI?
So basically, I use AI as like a cheat code to my life. And I'm a creative. I love writing. I love studying things the original way, using my brain. So I try to avoid using AI for as long as possible. Unfortunately, though, about a year ago, I gave in and totally embraced AI, and it's basically taken over my life. I'm sure we've all heard of ChatGPT. It's probably the main thing that people think of when AI comes is mentioned. Basically, I like using it a lot for basically just summarizing news stories for me. So often when we try to in this industry when we try to cover the news, it's a little bit overwhelming. There's so many news stories, the articles are so long. Sometimes you just don't have the time to read them properly. So I like to use ChatGPT to summarize them for me in a very succinct way. Unfortunately, I think the BBC came out with an article recently saying that 50% of the time, something like that, it is wrong. So you do have to double check. But I do love ChatGPT for summarizing news stories. Beyond that, though, I've actually discovered something recently called Notebook LM, which is a Google product and uses Google's version of AI called Gemini. And basically, it's going to replace us, Lois. You give it some material like a few news articles, let's say maybe a few scientific papers, and it can summarize it into a 20 or 30-minute podcast with two fake people. It is absolutely insane, and I think it's the best study tool in the world because instead of reading you can just listen to a fun podcast.
So here I
Absolutely
am
insane.
thinking, oh, broadcast hasn't got longer left. It's time to make the jump over to YouTube and do podcasting. And what you're telling me is AI is going to have that space in a few years. Great.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's even scarier than that even because I used to work at SBS, which is a news broadcasting station in Australia. And during my last few months over there, they were actually starting to use AI to replace news broadcasters for the when they needed to do a voiceover, for instance, to save time as such. And so I thought that was pretty scary. And they're also using AI to replace video editors because video editing takes a long time, and AI can sort of learn and embrace that. So I think we should be a little bit cautious of AI. Is replacing a lot of creative jobs, but at the same time, if you're smart, you'll just embrace it and sort of help it it can help you create more content.
Best case scenario though with AI is it just becomes tools to help. When you're a podcaster, maybe you're a one man band sometimes, or there might be a small production company behind you. But actually having those kind of AI tools to help you with things like video editing that you might not be good at is good. I don't know about this whole AI podcasters though. He said with huge vested interests. But I think the thing about podcasts and even news presenters is you're supposed to trust that person. You're supposed to sort of identify with them, and that authenticity is probably the one thing AI cannot replicate. That kind of, I trust this person, and this person is sometimes wrong, sometimes right, but I think generally overall, like, I sort of align with them. So they might be able to have the tech to do it, but as we've seen with other tech, sometimes there's just not the human interest in it, and it just dies a death.
Yeah, I think AI is most powerful when there is human oversight. If you just sort of assume that it's a tool to be embraced, like a tool to reach your creative outcome, rather than something to replace humans altogether, I think that's when AI is most powerful.
I
Because,
think it's basically it's one of those things. Like I'm sure that people didn't have the sort of fear mongering they had when spell check came out, where it's like, well, now no one will be able to spell again because the computer's doing it all for them. And society is still here. Like the sun still came up this morning. I know AI is a bit more complex than spell check, but it is just another tool being built into our arsenal of attacking the world.
I do have to say, I think spell check is the devil though, because I remember when I was 8 years old, we used to have a spelling bee in our school, and I was top in the school. Now, though, if you ask me to spell anything, I just cannot do it at all. It is honestly embarrassing how far I've fallen due to spell check.
They will write studies on that one day. Right, moving on from AI, which I think gets the Davis thumbs up, a cautious thumbs up.
I think so. Embrace it, but be careful.
So you review countless gadgets. So what's the most exciting piece of tech that you've seen recently that we should all know about?
So basically, I would have to say that tech is sort of, I'm sure we'll come to this later, but it's sort of in the dark ages. Like traditionally, I'm interested in cameras, smartphones, stuff like that. And for the past decade or so, it's been relatively boring. So we're all waiting for like the next big thing. And we thought smartwatches might be that for a while, but it happened, it's there, but it's relatively unexciting. I think the next big category are smart glasses. Like imagine if you could just pop on a pair of glasses and it can basically replace your smartphone. I think that is where the industry is going. And there have been a lot of attempts, into smart glasses. I think like Snapchat even did one about almost 10 years ago now, but that was relatively, it sort of came and went. It wasn't ready for the world. Meta last year, or I think it's actually almost 2 years ago since they unveiled it, they came out with the Meta smart glasses, and it's a very unassuming piece of technology, but I think it's absolutely fantastic, and it's a sign of the future. So, I've just got them in my hand right now. They just look like a normal pair of Ray-Bans, lovely.
Very stylish, very stylish.
However, inside these, there is genuinely a very good camera. It's brilliant. It's got brilliant stabilization. Like it genuinely feels like you've got a GoPro on your face all the time. So I feel like it sort of transforms the image capturing process. Like instead of being intentional, having to have a camera or having your phone out, you can take a photo anywhere. And in addition to that, you've got lots of AI tools. For example, I can literally point, look at, something in Japanese, ask it to translate it, and it will translate it for me. I think that's where the computing industry is going. And although it's not quite there yet, I think it's exciting because it's a preview of the future that's to come.
I love that. I think that could actually work, especially for me. One of the big pet peeves I have is that my kids will be doing something really cute, and I'll pull out my camera to take a picture to send to my mom or whoever. The second that camera comes out, they know, and they just stop doing it, and that the picture is over. So if I could be stealthily like on my sunglasses, that would be great. And I think that whole idea about being able to translate in real time, I could I could see it working. I could see it working.
Yeah, and sorry, just touching on AI again. But Google's recently come out with this thing where basically you can talk to another person in another language almost live. So, like, once that's integrated into smart glasses, especially, I think that would be simply incredible, especially for people who really struggle, like me, to learn another language.
So I've got two younger kids, so they're 2 and 4, and I recently wrote a list of everything that I want them to be able to do by the time they're 18, because that's just how organized I am. But I also think as a parent, you should have a plan for your kids.
I
So
can
there's
see you
different
being
things
a,
on there,
yeah, I can
like
see you being a scary dragon dad.
wouldn't say dragon dad, a dad with a plan, maybe. But there are things on there like, I'm always annoyed at my parents for not forcing me to learn to drive before I left home. So it's like, right, they're going to learn to drive, right, they're going to learn this, that. And one of the things I put on there was to learn another language, because I think all of the bilingual people I speak to are always saying, how much it helps their development. It puts their own language into context. Like someone said to me the other day, like, you never really understand your own language until you've learned another one. But if you're telling me some smart glasses could just replace it, like, is there any point forcing my children to Saturday classes to go and learn Spanish or whatever it is?
Well, that's sort of like, is there a point in learning to drive when, in 20 years probably every car will be self-driving? So I think it's a skill worth knowing, but at the same time, like knowing how to drive a manual car, it might be a little bit irrelevant very soon in the future.
I'm going to do it anyway, because then at least my children can say, oh, I learnt Spanish the old fashioned way. They'll be able to say to their grandkids, we used to drive the car ourselves. Like, my dad forced us to learn to drive it. We said, Dad, there's an automatic button. Why can't we just use that? He said, no. All right, perfect. So this brings me on to another question I wanted to ask you, which I sort of think you've already answered. But as a tech expert, do you think that we are living in a golden age of technology? And if not, where do you, with sort of knowing where these things are going, like you're talking about the smart glasses and AI, like where do you think we're about to reach peak technological innovation, and then that will be it? Like, what does that look like? A really golden age of tech integrating, not overwhelming us too much, but being an actual help to us.
Yeah, I'd say like in the sense of excitement, sort of like opening your news source and being really excited for all the tech releases. I think we sort of are in a dark age for the longest time, since I would argue since maybe around 2015. Every single new tech item that comes out, the camera's a bit better, the screens might be a bit brighter, but overall, it hasn't been too exciting. And, we got foldable phones a few years back, but, it hasn't really taken the world by a storm. I think for almost a decade now, we've been waiting for the next big item to be released. And, we've had tastes of little things that have come and went, but I think we're just on the precipice of something really, really exciting coming out. And I think that AI really has a lot to do with it because I think AI has sort of made tech almost more accessible. And take this example, for instance. Although I love my video editing, I simply can't get my head around Photoshop. Photoshop has just been a struggle for me for basically all of my life. However, now with artificial intelligence, all I have to do in Photoshop in order to make the change I want is that I just highlight the bit that I want, I type in, please add a man juggling some balls, and then it will create that for me. I think because of artificial intelligence, it's going to make technology a lot more accessible because you can just tell it what you want it to do in your natural language, probably English, I imagine, and it just makes that technology accessible. Instead of having to learn, because I spent all of my life learning how to video edit, and it's a little bit of a skill. It takes a long while for some people to get their minds around it, but now with artificial intelligence, it just happens. So I think we are coming to a very exciting age of technology where more of it is accessible to more people than ever before.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. At work, I've been playing with Copilot's image generation. So, in previous times you'd be doing a deck and a huge amount of time would be spent trying to find the right images to put with certain things. Now I can just like throw in the slide from the deck and say, create an image that summarizes this, and boom, it's done. So I quite enjoy it. Look, I see the potential in AI, I really do. They'll play this in 20 years' time when it killed us all, being like these idiots. They just didn't know what they were saying.
I feel like AI just won't kill us all. I feel like unless if there's an evil person who programs AI to, do something terrible, like, to take down a nuclear reactor or whatever, I don't think it's something to be feared.
Yeah. Well, changing step a little bit here now. So, look, we are at a time, as you're saying, like tech is there to make our life easier, to really help us to make things more accessible. So, why do so many people, in your opinion, feel so overwhelmed by technology? We have people talking about being addicted to their phones, the doom scroll. We've got a big conversation going on around should children have any access to phones or technology, despite living in a really technological world. And people saying that although they've got access to billions of people through their phone, they feel more isolated than ever. So, what's your opinion there?
Yeah, I feel like there's multiple questions within that question. So, firstly, I think I'm going to touch upon why people feel overwhelmed about the progress of technology. And I think it's just that there's a learning curve to everything. Like, for example, when AI came out, it's been around for a few years. I sort of was like, okay, this is not something I'm going to embrace. I feel like, it's probably going to pass and then I can sort of ignore it. However, once, some time had taken place, I heard more and more about it. I sort of like learned about it and then sort of like, dipped my toes into it. And now I absolutely love artificial intelligence. It just takes time for people to get used to the concept of a new piece of technology. And when there's new technology coming out all the time, I think that's when people start feeling overwhelmed with the progress of things. And onto the second part of that question, why, when we are so, when people have embraced so much technology that makes it so much easier to connect with people, why do people feel so overwhelmed? Well, I think it's just the possibility. It's sort of like if you walk into a grocery store to buy some milk, and if there's only one or two choices, you just buy one of them and you continue with your day. But now, if you walk into the grocery store and there's 20,000 options of milk, like you're like, oh my god, I have to like sit there, sort of like contemplate what my stomach is feeling like today. Am I lactose intolerant or not? Do I feel like oat milk? Do I feel like I want almond? It's the choice that makes things so difficult. When you've got access to basically your entire life's worth of connections, which could be thousands of people, who do you message? I think that is the overwhelming thing, the amount of choice that technology has really brought along.
I really like that analogy of the milk in the supermarket. And I think the one thing you don't say is like when you eventually make the choice, if you get home and that milk is not the best milk you've ever tasted, you feel negative. Like you were given 20, 50 options. How could you have chosen something
Yeah.
and it not be perfect? And I think a lot of people get this with like sort of a Netflix or a streaming service, right? Where it's like you could watch anything, millions of options. So you then go into, well, I can't decide. And then if you do decide and you didn't love that film and it wasn't the best film you ever seen, you've no one to blame but yourself. Whereas in a time before where there weren't phones and you just had the people in your village or the people in your town to talk to, it was like, well, the choice is gone. So I guess I have to speak to this person at the bus stop. Whereas now I feel like, and I think this impacts the mental health aspect of it. It's like you have got a million opportunities. So if you're unhappy, it's your own fault.
Yeah, I think that's the genius behind TikTok as well, because it takes away that choice. It just like it assumes that you will like this, and it serves the option to you. So, there's no choice. You just keep on scrolling to your eventual doom. So, I think Netflix is trying to solve that as well by suggesting, films or TV shows to watch without giving you that choice.
Yeah. So, as a tech expert and on a podcast sort of about life hacks, do you have any hacks or even rules you live by? Like, do you limit yourself to only scrolling for 30 minutes a day, or do you have, some sort of rule about only looking at a screen for so long? Like, do you have any rules around your use of tech to make you not feel too overwhelmed?
So not really. I don't really prescribe by the idea that you should really limit how much you view, like screen time wise. However, I do feel quite guilty when, my phone says I've been using it for 12 hours today. So what I like to do, it's my little hack, to get that number down, instead of just using one phone, use multiple phones. That way you'll only be spending a few hours on each phone a day. But seriously, I think the concern is for a lot of people is that modern screen technologies, LCD, OLED, they're not brilliant for the eyes. So we do sort of want to embrace other screen technologies that are easier on the eyes. So there's been a rise of e-ink displays recently, sort of the screens that we see on Kindles. Instead of transmitting light to you, they reflect light, like reading on paper. And we're seeing a lot of smartphones actually sort of embracing this technology. So if you do want to reduce your screen time, I would sort of recommend looking into smartphones with e-ink displays because it actually reduces eye strain a lot if that is your concern.
That's a great tip. Let's talk about tech in the house because I have got real envy when you see people that are like, they've got all of their connected devices working together. They walk into a room and the lights come on, and they've got, their. I was literally out at dinner with someone, and she was like, "Just a second, I just want to check the kids are in bed." And she had like a camera in the kids' room, and she was looking on her phone. She's like, "Yeah, they're asleep, perfect." And you've got all these people now that like, I don't know if this is a thing yet, but rather than carry keys, which I hate carrying keys, so I always lose them, you're just going up to their door and saying the password and it opens, or using their thumbprint. So, what are some of the best tech things around the house that you would recommend?
So when I bought my new place, when I was living in Sydney, I was sort of like convinced that I want to make this, a smart house. I want to get all of the latest technology to make it as connected as possible. And then I realized through the process of making that all happen that it actually makes your life more difficult than it has to. Because although it sounds brilliant, like not all of it works very well, and it doesn't work well together at all. For example, when I enter my house and I want to turn on the lights, instead of just flicking a switch, I have to enunciate, "Hey Siri, please turn on the lights in the living room," or whatever. And it just ended up being a little bit of a nightmare. But I would say there are certain pieces that I do really like of smart tech. For example, when I do enter my house, I just use my phone. I don't have to bring my keys at all. I don't have to, like spare a pocket, for some keys. And I think smart locks are something that genuinely is a very good invention. Obviously, there are some security concerns. However, I'm sure there are security concerns with traditional keys as well. So I think smart locks are a very good idea indeed. What else? I would say avoid getting those colorful RGB smart lights because although they look very cool and they can be quite expensive, they're like, what, 50 quid each. So if you need 20 light bulbs in your house, that is a tremendous outlay. Like, I ended up using the RGB lights about, like, what, twice? So
Right.
probably avoid them. And yeah, I'd say smart locks are probably my favorite smart tech feature that I've got in my house. And avoid the curtains. They just never work. They always get stuck. Open your
Right.
curtains yourself.
I was speaking to someone we both know really well, David Bull, and I think it was on his show, and I might have actually been on with you, and we were talking. You might have been there actually for this conversation,
Possibly.
but we were talking about smart fridges, and he was having none of
Oh,
it because
yes.
he thought that the fridge would take a look at him and say no, fatso, and not open the door. That was his worry that the fridges, that the appliances would start having an opinion and deciding
Yeah.
what was best for you.
No, they genuinely do have an opinion now because I was at IFA, which is like the big tech conference in Berlin last year, and Samsung's big thing was sort of like AI home appliances, and refrigerators were one of them. So it can basically scan everything that goes in and out of your fridge, and it can create recipes accordingly. And so it can definitely judge what you eat, and I'm sure if you ask it to lock it, you can lock you out of that mud cake. I'm sure it could do that. Probably not yet, but like one day.
How do you feel about smart hoovers? Because as a busy dad, I do keep eyeing these smart hoovers, and Amazon definitely is like pushing them to me at the moment. I'm just thinking, oh, could they work, or are they just, they get stuck behind a table and that's it? They're not
Oh,
actually
do you
that
mean the
smart.
robotic ones? The
Yeah, like
little,
these hoovers that
yeah.
just go about and do it for you.
I love them. I have
Okay.
to admit, I think they've been around for 20 years now. When they first came out, they were pretty rubbish. But the latest ones literally sort of like automates itself. Because not only can they hoover, but they can mop as well. They can steam the floor. And the best bit is that instead of having to empty out the dust compartment every single time, now they empty themselves out into, a bigger dust bag. And
Wow.
they can also dry that and clean their mops and reapply the cleaning solution. Although they're very expensive, I am lucky enough to have received a few of them, and they are brilliant. But if you do have like multiple steps in your house, you sort of need like if you've got multiple floors in your house, you need multiple hoovers as well, and they can get very expensive.
Right. So you said that you are not a Star Trek fan, and I am a massive Star Trek fan. And I'm convinced that minus teleportation and obviously space travel, we're practically living in Star Trek now because there are voice activated computers like they had in,
Yes.
and this was a show, and I'm talking about the next generation. This was a show in the 80s, imagining the future. I'm like, God, we're already quite there with a lot of it. Like, we've got voice activated computers. I'm sure if I could figure out how to do it, I could say, to my computer, turn the lights off, send a message to Davis, like all of this stuff. The only thing I really want, do you tell me, can I set this up with an Alexa or something? I always, I as a dad, you think a lot about security, and if a crazy person bursts into the house right now, what would you do? And I would love to be able to like shout something to my computer that would then sort of, set an alarm off, live stream the cameras, instantly contact the police without me having to worry about where my phone is, so I can focus on that person whilst the computer is, letting everyone know something's wrong. Is that a possible thing yet?
I definitely do think that it is a thing. I'd probably suggest, though, in that situation, that you get, a smartwatch like an Apple Watch. You can just
Mm-hmm.
press down on one of the buttons, and after 10 seconds, it will automatically call the authorities. So I would suggest something like that.
Wow.
However, getting back to Star Trek, I do know that there is a pin that everyone loves. Like, I'm not sure
Yes.
what exactly it does, but I'm assuming it's got like the features of a smartphone in a pin. But like last year, there was a gadget called the Humane AI pen. And for
Yes.
those people who've heard of it, I'm sure they're laughing because it was quite possibly one of the worst gadgets of last year. It just didn't work at all. I think they're accepting more returns and they're selling units at the moment. But the idea was like imagine if you just condense your entire smartphone into a pin that you put on your chest. It's powered by AI, so basically you tell it to do whatever you want to do, and it's actually got sort of a laser projector display, so it projects content onto your hand, and then you use your hand in sort of like weird gestures to control it. And I think the idea of it definitely came from Star Trek. It's definitely a very cool device, but if only it worked, and it just didn't work.
But I think it's because, and this happens a lot, people think, oh, well, it's tech, like it's got to mimic the smartphone, right? Whereas for me, knowing Star Trek, thinking about the pins, but also thinking as a dad in real life, we have this big debate at the moment around kids shouldn't have mobile phones. What people don't talk about is that actually giving your kids mobile phones is mainly around safety, right? Like parents want to be able to track the iPhone to know where their child is. They want to be able to have their child contact them if something goes wrong. So I think if a smart pin actually sort of said, well, actually this is for parents and children, and it had limited functions, right? So if the child was scared, like your whole watch thing, if I press this pin for 10 seconds, it automatically opens up a line and calls the three people that have been designated, like, whoever I would call in an emergency. If you could tap it and say, tell mom I'm on the way home, if it had a tracking device in it, so it's like I, as a parent, can see, yeah, they're 13 now, she's walking home by herself, I can track her as she walks, that kind of thing. Or if they get lost, they can like press it and say, take me to grandma's house, and then it speaks and says, right, walk forward until you reach this road and then turn right. Like I as a parent would buy that hands down. So almost this thing trying to mimic a phone where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, I've got a projector screen. Like I don't think you need all that stuff. You just need to understand your target audience. I'd spend hundreds of pounds on a pin that could do that for my kids.
I think the idea definitely is there, but the functionality of having a pin, it isn't as good as a smartwatch, I would argue. Because with the Humane pin, people just complained that it was too heavy, it fell off all the time, the battery life was woeful. You could basically replicate all of those features in a smartwatch, and they already do exist. There are smartwatches that are created for kids specifically for that situation. I see a lot of parents giving their kids their old Apple Watches, and you can sort of set them up with cellular connectivity, and you can set them up with your own iPhone so your kids don't have to have an iPhone themselves. So I think, fantastic idea, but it sort of exists already with a smartwatch.
You know what? This is my entire life. I'll think of a great invention in tech and be like, my God, this is it. This is how I make a billion. And then I'll Google it and it's like, that already exists.
I
So
think
great.
innovation in tech really isn't about inventing anything new. Rather, it's taking existing ideas and just spinning it in a slightly different way. So I think, your brain definitely is there with all the inventions. You just need to sell it in a way that doesn't quite exist in a way yet.
Right, well, let's talk a little bit more about you. So you are a technology presenter. Tell us a little bit about how did you get into tech? How did you start doing what you're doing?
Oh God, how did I get into tech originally? Well, my dad was really into his hi-fi systems.
Okay.
So growing up, I think we basically had no money. However, my dad somehow found a way to buy like the world's biggest and most expensive like home theater system in the world. And I think from there, I was just like really impressed with all the buttons and stuff. So like my passion for technology really came from the massive I think it was a Mission branded home speaker system. And from there, I just loved my little gadgets. Like, I loved my, I don't know if you remember, but like in the past, when you opened up your mailbox, there'd be 1,000 different catalogs full of different items from different stores. And I used to cut up all of the mobile phones in PDAs and stick them in my scrapbook. Like, when I'm older, I want to buy one of them. And sort of when I got older, I started sort of like embracing this sort of these mobile devices that were so exciting to me. And then eventually, by the time I got my first smartphone, I started when I was 11. I started watching all of these technology YouTubers. I'm sure we've heard of MKBHD, who's the biggest one. He's got like well over 10 million subscribers now. And my passion for technology really sort of like continued from watching all of this fantastic content online because this isn't really content that's embraced by mainstream media. You don't really see that many TV shows, let's say, that are specifically about technology. We never had our Top Gear for, tech as such.
Yeah.
So I think it's really the online mediums of people, creating their own content that sort of like propelled this passion for me. However, the funny thing is that for the longest time, I was too embarrassed to sort of admit that I was really into tech. Like, I started a YouTube channel like well over 10 years ago, and I was like, yeah, I could do one about technology, but like, it's, I don't want to be a geek. So we talked about completely different things about like online sort of online culture. That's what we ended up on, and
You
obviously
can't
that
be a
did.
geek. You're not into Star Trek, so that was never going to happen. No one's going to call you a geek.
Definitely not. But like it was only during COVID when I was like, hang on, actually this isn't working. Let's actually just do a TikTok channel about, what I'm actually passionate about, which is technology. And that started doing really well. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to be myself. I'm going to talk about technology. And, people really saw, like when you talk about things that you are passionate about, people actually do see that. So yeah, that's how I got into technology presenting, really.
And so if someone is listening to this and thinks, "Oh my god, like I love that. Why haven't I ever thought of it?" So you saying, sort of finding an online channel, whether that be TikTok or YouTube, is probably better for understanding and getting a good grip on tech than sort of reading the technology pages of major newspapers.
I'd say major newspapers, they don't really cover technology particularly well. It's only really technology with a political viewpoint. For example, if you open up, I don't know, The Guardian or whatever, on their technology pages, you won't really, see these are the rumors for the next iPhone. Rather, you'd say, oh, the UK government is trying to hack into iCloud. It's interesting stuff, but it's not something that a typical fan of consumer technology would really be interested in. I think the great thing with online content creation where anyone can create content like us is that specific niches are really there's content for every single niche imaginable. So like no matter if you are into weird Tamagotchis or like what else is really niche, like if you're a brony, for instance, there's online content directly targeted at you. I think that's a brilliant thing with YouTube and TikTok recently.
Yeah. So, technology presenter, you are at the precipice of everything that's going on, of all the tech that's coming up, all of the tech you've pretty much tried. You have God knows how many phones. But what is one piece of retro technology that you still use?
So I am sort of a nostalgia tragic. I absolutely love nostalgia. Like, although I really look into the future, I love all the new things that are coming out. I am like anything that takes me back to my childhood, I absolutely adore. And something that takes me back to my childhood are physical keyboard phones. So, like your Blackberries, your Palm Trio, stuff like that. So recently, I've sort of like I did a video recently talking about all the different ways that you can have a BlackBerry in your life in 2025. And obviously, BlackBerry's been away for a little while. You can't really use their phones anymore. So, for example, there is a brand called Unihertz that does a physical keyboard phone right now that I've been using over the past year or so. It is not very good at all, but it gives you a physical keyboard. And there's another brand right now called Clicks. Basically, it's a iPhone case that you put your iPhone into and it gives you a keyboard. Obviously, people look at this and they're like, yeah, we've already got a virtual keyboard on our iPhones. Why do we need a physical keyboard? Well, I just like pressing buttons, okay? So I think this might be a trend that continues over the next couple of years. I think people are realizing that we do want a little bit of tactility. We want physical feedback from when we type. For example, when we want to do some work on our iPads, we put it on a Magic Keyboard. We don't type on the touchscreen. I think people are going to see that for smartphones again, hopefully within the next year or so.
Yeah, I love a bit of retro. I actually bought, I mean, this was more for display, like an old retro phone with like the dials and things like that. And then after I brought it, I saw that you can sort of, there's some Bluetooth ones where basically if it senses your phone, it can just pull the call. And I thought, oh, I should have got one of those. So I'd love to be in the house and be like, the phone's ringing, and then actually have to walk over and go and answer it. Although I think that would get pretty old pretty quickly.
They're good, but my problem is that they're all plastic and horrible, whereas all the old ones are really nice and metal. Like, I love retro, but like it needs to be well made. I can't stand, cheap plastic stuff.
No, I feel you, I feel you. But yeah, a little bit more retro in our lives, I think, would be nice. I love following all of the Instagram accounts, which is like AI retro nostalgia of like life in the 80s as a stockbroker, life in the 90s as a housewife, whatever it is. Like I love that kind of the aesthetics of like everything then seemed like just beautifully made. Like whether it
Yeah.
is your phones or whether it's the cars, it's like, oh, there was something about it. I mean, probably wouldn't want to live in those time periods because of the political implications, but it looked beautiful.
Yeah, I think that really ties into the Gen Z trend right now, where everyone is dying to get an old compact camera. I'm sure we all remember these from like, 20 years ago, these absolutely
Yeah.
atrocious digicams, we call them. I think it's just younger people these days. They're calling for devices that are made specifically for one thing. So instead of having a smartphone that does absolutely everything, younger people are sort of, they're buying old iPods because they want singular devices that are built for a singular purpose. We're starting to see the return of, big cameras as well, like not just little digicams, but sort of like retro style mirrorless cameras. So I think there definitely is very much a demand for sort of like retro inspired items these days. So if you are in charge of designing a product, just make it retro and it will probably sell.
Right. Let's bring this home with a few quick fire questions. So,
Exciting.
what's one piece of tech that you think has the potential to truly change lives but isn't getting the attention it deserves?
I would say probably the iPad. I know it's probably a weird answer, but like everyone is so down on the iPad right now. Nobody has seems to have bought one in the past 5 years. But I recently upgraded my iPad, and I think it's fantastic for when I don't need a computer, but I just need something nice and compact to carry around.
Nice. You know why I won't upgrade my iPad? The only reason
They're
is
super
because I
expensive.
that and I like the fingerprint thing because on my phone, which is Face ID, like the children have worked out how to bring my phone over to me to make it unlock and then run off with it. So if it has to be thumbprints like the iPad, like they can't just sort of you know tape my thumbprint like they do with my face. So I'm like, as a parent, I need the thumbprint. That's why. That's the only reason I haven't
Yeah,
upgraded.
I think the iPad Airs still have the fingerprint reader instead of Face ID, so you could get one of those models.
There we go. So what piece of technology outside of the iPad would you encourage people to invest in right now?
And probably a mirrorless digital camera. Not only are they really stupidly difficult to get right now because Gen Z just want, nice physical cameras, but they won't depreciate as well. So the value will probably continue into the future.
Love it. And for anyone that might watch this and sort of feel a little bit out of the loop on technology and think, you know what, I need to take this more seriously because there's some tech out there that could really help me live a better life and just take some of the work out of it. Where are places that you go to keep up to date with technology news?
My favorite website that I've been following for the past 15 years is called The Verge. It's quite a left-leaning site. I think it's tied with The Vox as well, but it's got the best technology news that sort of condensed into something that's really readable and that's quite easy to digest as well. So The Verge.
Love that. And for anyone that has listened or watched this and thought, that Davis guy is really good, where can people go to find out a little bit more about you?
I am Davis Fang Tech at all social media platforms: TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, all of them.
Brilliant. Davis Fang, thank you so much.